The sound of his palm striking her face echoed across the range like a gunshot. 40 Marines stood frozen. Colonel Marcus Davenport, decorated officer general's son, had just slapped a 22-year-old female contractor in front of his entire command. He expected her to cry, to crumble, to prove that women didn't belong in his world. 5 seconds later, he was face down in the dirt, his wrist locked at an impossible angle, staring at classified documents that revealed the woman he'd just assaulted was a DevGru operator investigating him for murder. Camp Pendleton, California. 3 days earlier. This is how it began. From which city are you watching today? Drop your location in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you believe real strength never announces itself, consider subscribing. This is the story of the operator nobody saw coming. The rifle cracked once. Clean. Sharp. The sound disappeared into the California morning before anyone could trace its origin. 800 meters downrange, the target absorbed the round exactly where it needed to go. Not close to center, not near the bullseye. Dead center. A perfect shot that would have meant the difference between a hostage saved and a hostage killed in any real-world scenario. Reagan Cole lowered her weapon and waited. Time, the range instructor called out, his voice carrying across the firing line. All shooters, safe your weapons. She complied without speaking. Her movements were economical, practiced, stripped of any unnecessary flourish. She didn't adjust her stance for show. She didn't make a production of clearing her rifle. She simply did what needed to be done with the kind of quiet efficiency that came from doing something so many times it had stopped being a skill and become instinct. Around her, a dozen Marine special operators were completing the same drill. Most of them were twice her age. All of them were twice her size. And none of them had come close to matching her score. Staff Sergeant Derek Holloway squinted through his spotting scope at the distant target, then looked at his own, then back at hers. His jaw tightened. Who the hell is she? He muttered to the operator beside him. Contractor Gunnery Sergeant Torres replied, not bothering to hide his irritation. Marksmanship consultant. Showed up 3 days ago with paperwork from somewhere above our pay grade. Marksmanship consultant. Holloway almost laughed. She just put rounds through the same hole at 800 meters in a 15-knot crosswind. I've been shooting professionally for 12 years. I can't do that. Maybe she got lucky. Nobody gets that lucky, not 3 days in a row. Torres didn't respond. He was watching the young woman walk toward the equipment shed, her rifle balanced across her shoulders, with the casual ease of someone who had carried weapons since before she could vote. There was something about the way she moved that bothered him, something he couldn't quite identify. It wasn't arrogance. Arrogant people wanted you to notice them. This woman seemed to actively avoid attention sliding through the facility like a ghost, never speaking, unless spoken to, never engaging in the casual banter that was the social currency of military life. She was hiding something. Torres had been around long enough to recognize the signs. The question was, what? Master Gunnery Sergeant Leon Cross had been training snipers for 18 years. He had seen thousands of shooters come through his programs, good ones, great ones, and a handful of genuinely exceptional ones. He knew what talent looked like. He knew what training looked like. And he knew what experience looked like. What he was seeing through his binoculars was something else entirely. He lowered the optics and reached for his secure phone, dialing a number he hadn't used in months. Personnel, a woman's voice answered. Clipped, professional. This is Master Guns Cross at Pendleton. I need background on a contractor currently operating at my facility. Name is Reagan Cole, civilian marksmanship consultant. A pause. The sound of typing. I'm showing that contractor's file is restricted Master Gunnery Sergeant. Access requires JSOC special authorization. Cross felt something cold settle in his stomach. JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command. That wasn't a marksmanship consultant. That was something else entirely. Can you tell me who authorized her access to my facility? More typing. Then a longer pause. I'm showing the authorization originated from the Office of the Secretary of the Navy. Cross's grip tightened on the phone. The Secretary of the Navy didn't personally authorize contractor access to training facilities. That simply didn't happen. Unless. Is there anything else I can help you with? Master Gunnery Sergeant, no, Cross said quietly. That's all I needed to know. He ended the call and stood at the window of his office, watching the small figure of Reagan Cole disappear into the equipment shed. 22 years old. No rank insignia, no unit identification, just a contractor badge and shooting skills that surpassed anything he had ever witnessed. Someone very high up had sent this woman to his facility, and they had gone to extraordinary lengths to make sure nobody knew who she really was or why she was here. Cross had been in the military long enough to recognize when he was looking at a problem. The question was whether the problem was his to solve or his to stay far away from. Reagan finished cleaning her rifle in the equipment shed, her hands moving through the familiar motions, while her mind cataloged everything she had observed over the past 3 days. The facility was a mess. Not physically, the buildings were maintained, the equipment was modern, the ranges were well designed, but the systems that were supposed to ensure quality and safety had been systematically hollowed out, replaced by a culture of appearance over substance. She had documented 47 violations of training protocols in 72 hours. Safety shortcuts that could get someone killed. Maintenance schedules that existed only on paper. Qualification records that showed scores nobody had actually achieved. And underneath all of it, the shadow of something darker. 2 Marines had died at this facility in the past year. Training accidents, according to the official reports. Unfortunate but unavoidable consequences of preparing warriors for combat. Except the reports didn't match the evidence. The timelines had inconsistencies. The witness statements had been cleaned up too thoroughly smoothed of the natural contradictions that always appeared when multiple people described the same event. Someone had covered something up, and Reagan was here to find out who. Her phone buzzed with a secure message from JSOC headquarters. She read it once, memorized the contents, and deleted it. Davenport arriving tomorrow. Proceed with caution. He has political protection at the highest levels. Colonel Marcus Davenport, commanding officer of the facility. Son of Lieutenant General Harrison Davenport, one of the most politically connected 3 stars in the Marine Corps. A man whose career had been fast-tracked through every assignment, who had never faced real accountability because his family name opened doors that stayed closed for everyone else. Reagan put her phone away and resumed cleaning her rifle. She had dealt with men like Davenport before. Men who confused the power of their position with actual competence. Men who expected compliance because the organizational chart said people had to give it to them. Those men always underestimated her. It was in many ways her greatest advantage. The mess hall was crowded during dinner, filled with the sounds of Marines eating and talking and doing all the normal things that military personnel did when they weren't actively training. Reagan sat alone at a corner table, eating quickly and efficiently, appearing to focus entirely on her food. But she was listening. Always listening. You see that contractors' groups today? The voice belonged to Holloway, sitting 2 tables away with his back to her. I'm telling you, that's not normal shooting. That's something else. She's got to be former military, Torres replied. Nobody moves like that without training. So why isn't she wearing a uniform? Why is she here as a civilian? Maybe she washed out of something, got kicked out and ended up contracting. You don't get kicked out of anything and then end up shooting better than instructors. That's not how it works. A third voice joined the conversation. Younger. Female. Maybe she's here to evaluate us. The table went quiet. Reagan recognized the voice. Petty Officer Maya Santos, 24 years old. One of only 3 women currently in the sniper training program. Reagan had been watching her for 3 days, noting her skill, her determination, and the way certain male instructors looked at her when they thought nobody was paying attention. Evaluate us. Holloway sounded defensive. What are you talking about? Think about it, Maya continued. She shows up with classified paperwork that nobody can read. She participates in every drill but never talks to anyone. She shoots better than everyone but never brags about it. She's watching us, all of us, all the time. The silence stretched longer this time. That's paranoid, Torres finally said. But his voice lacked conviction. Is it after what happened to Reeves and Castillo? Reagan's hand stopped moving over her food tray. Reeves and Castillo, the 2 Marines who had died. Maya had just connected dots that nobody else was willing to connect out loud. Santos. Holloway's voice dropped low warning. You need to be careful what you say. I'm just asking questions. Questions get people in trouble around here. You want to finish this program, you keep your head down and your mouth shut. Understand? I understand plenty. Reagan heard the sound of a chair pushing back. Footsteps. Then Maya Santos walked past her table, heading toward the exit. Their eyes met for just a fraction of a second. Something passed between them in that brief moment. Recognition. Understanding. The unspoken acknowledgement of women who had learned to survive in spaces that weren't built for them. Then Maya was gone, and Reagan returned her attention to her meal. But the wheels in her mind were turning faster now. Maya Santos knew something, and Reagan needed to find out what. The knock on her quarters door came at 2300 hours. Reagan was at her desk reviewing documents on a secure tablet when the sound interrupted her concentration. She moved to the door silently, her hand automatically finding the weapon she kept within reach at all times. Who is it? Santos, I need to talk to you. Reagan considered for a moment, then opened the door. Maya stood in the hallway looking nervous but determined. She was still in her training uniform, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun. Her eyes scanned the corridor before settling on Reagan's face. Can I come in? Reagan stepped aside without speaking. Maya entered, and Reagan closed the door behind her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Maya seemed to be gathering her courage, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Reagan waited. She had learned a long time ago that people revealed more when you let silence do the work. I know you're not just a contractor, Maya finally said. Reagan's expression didn't change. What makes you think that? The way you move, the way you shoot, the way you look at everything like you're taking notes for a report nobody's going to read. Maya's voice was steady now, gaining confidence. And the way Colonel Davenport's staff has been running around for 2 days trying to figure out who you really are and why nobody told them you were coming. Davenport's staff knows I'm here. Everyone knows you're here. You can't hide being that good at what you do. People notice. Maya paused. And people talk. Reagan absorbed this information. She had expected her presence to create some curiosity, but she hadn't anticipated that Davenport's people would be actively investigating her before he even arrived at the facility. Why are you here, Petty Officer Santos? Maya took a breath. I need to tell you about something that happened. Something I reported through official channels 6 months ago. Something that got buried. What kind of something? Staff Sergeant Morrison, one of the instructors. He's been... Maya's voice faltered slightly. He's been targeting female trainees. Comments at first, then touching, then worse. Reagan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. You reported this. I filed a formal complaint, had witnesses, had documentation. Within 2 weeks, the complaint disappeared. Morrison got a commendation letter and early promotion. The woman who witnessed what he did got transferred to a dead-end assignment in Nebraska. And you? I got called into Colonel Davenport's office. Personally. He told me that talented women sometimes invited unwanted attention, and that if I wanted to finish the program, I should learn to handle situations like a professional instead of crying to human resources. Reagan felt something cold and sharp crystallize in her chest. It was the same feeling she got before every mission that involved people who had abused their power. The same feeling that had driven her to accept this assignment in the first place. Can you prove any of this? Not anymore. They cleaned everything up. But I kept copies, private notes, recordings Morrison didn't know I was making. Why are you telling me this? Maya met her eyes directly. Because you're the first person who's shown up at this facility who might actually be able to do something about it. Because I've been watching you for 3 days and I can tell you're not here to check boxes on a training evaluation, and because whatever you're really investigating, Morrison and his friends are probably part of it. Reagan was quiet for a moment, calculating. Maya Santos had just taken an enormous risk. If Reagan was really just a civilian contractor, this conversation could get Maya court-martialed for sharing classified information with unauthorized personnel. The fact that she had done it anyway meant she was either desperate brave or both. Where are these copies you kept? Hidden. Safe. Not on base. And you're willing to share them with me. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make sure these people answer for what they've done. To me, to the other women they've harassed, and to Reeves and Castillo. Reagan's attention sharpened. What do Reeves and Castillo have to do with Morrison? Maya's face hardened. Corporal Castillo filed a harassment complaint against Morrison 3 weeks before her training accident. Sergeant Reeves was her witness. He was going to testify for her at the investigation. She paused, letting the weight of the words settle. They both died in the same training exercise. An exercise that wasn't on the official schedule until that morning. An exercise that put them in a live fire zone without proper safety protocols. The silence in the room was absolute. Reagan understood now. This wasn't just an audit of training standards. This was a murder investigation dressed up as an administrative review. Someone at this facility had killed 2 Marines to cover up a harassment scandal. And the evidence trail led directly to the people who would do anything to keep their secrets buried. Davenport arrives tomorrow, Reagan said quietly. Things are going to move fast after that. Can you get me those copies before he lands? Maya nodded. I can have them to you by 600. Then we'll talk again. But Santos, from this moment on, you tell no one else what you've told me. Not your friends, not your fellow trainees, no one. The people who killed Reeves and Castillo won't hesitate to add another name to the list. Understood? Understood. Maya moved toward the door, then paused. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. Who are you really? Reagan considered the question. Protocol said she should maintain her cover, but Maya had just risked everything to give her crucial information. That deserved some measure of honesty in return. I'm someone who makes sure people answer for their crimes, Reagan said quietly, even when those people think they're untouchable. Maya nodded slowly. Something shifted in her expression. Hope, maybe, or relief at finally finding someone willing to believe her. Good, she said. Because the untouchable ones are the worst. They never see it coming when someone touches them back. Cross was working late when the call came through on his private line. He answered on the second ring. Master Gunnery Sergeant Cross. Leon. The voice on the other end was familiar. Captain Angela Morrison, a friend from his early days in the Corps, who now worked intelligence at CENTCOM. "We need to talk, off the record." "I'm listening." "That contractor you asked about, Reagan Cole. I did some digging. Unofficial channels. And Leon. I don't know what's happening at your facility, but whatever it is, it's serious enough that some very important people want answers. Reagan Cole isn't a marksmanship consultant. She's a DevGru operator, Tier 1, one of the youngest ever selected for the unit." Cross felt his stomach drop. "DevGru? She's a SEAL?" "She's the kind of operator whose missions never make it into official records. The kind who goes places that don't exist to do things that never happened." A pause. "And right now she's at your facility conducting a classified investigation that bypasses every normal chain of command. Whatever she's looking at, it goes all the way to the top." "The top of what?" "I don't know. But I do know that Colonel Davenport's people have been making calls all day trying to find out who sent her and why. They're scared, Leon. Scared enough to be stupid." Cross closed his eyes, pieces clicking into place in his mind. The training deaths, the covered-up investigations, the way certain things never added up no matter how many times they were explained. "What are you telling me to do?" "I'm telling you to stay out of the way. Whatever's about to happen, you don't want to be standing between that young woman and her targets." Another pause, heavier this time. "She's buried teammates, Leon. Friends. People who died because someone somewhere failed to do their job right. That's what drives her. And people who are driven like that don't stop until they've found what they're looking for. And if what she finds is uglier than anyone expects, then God help the people who made the mess, because she won't." Reagan spent the hours before dawn reviewing everything she had gathered. The training records, the safety reports, the timeline of the 2 deaths. The inconsistencies that became more glaring the more closely she examined them. And now, thanks to Maya Santos, she had the missing piece. Harassment. Cover-up. Murder. Someone had killed 2 Marines to bury a scandal that would have ended careers and potentially sent people to prison. And that someone had enough power to make complaints disappear, transfer witnesses, and manipulate training schedules to create the conditions for fatal accidents. There was only one person at this facility with that kind of authority. One person whose political connections made him believe he was untouchable. Colonel Marcus Davenport. He would arrive in less than 8 hours. He would expect to find a training facility running exactly the way he had left it. He would expect his secrets to remain buried and his victims to remain silent. He had no idea what was waiting for him. Reagan finished her review and began the methodical process of preparing for the day ahead. Each movement precise, each decision calculated. She had been invisible for 3 days. Now it was time to become visible. And when she did, everything would change. Maya Santos arrived at Reagan's quarters at 0547. 13 minutes ahead of schedule. Her hands were shaking when she passed over the flash drive, but her voice was steady. "Everything's on there. Audio recordings, photos of bruises, timestamps, names of other women Morrison targeted." She paused. "And something else. Something I wasn't sure I should include." Reagan took the drive. "What?" "Text messages between Morrison and someone in Davenport's office, from the day before Castillo and Reeves died. They're coded, but..." Maya's jaw tightened. "One of them says, 'Problem will be resolved by EOD tomorrow. End of day.' The training accident happened at 16:30 that afternoon." Reagan felt the cold certainty settle deeper into her bones. This wasn't circumstantial anymore. This was conspiracy. This was premeditated murder. "You did the right thing," she said quietly. "Did I?" Maya's voice cracked slightly. "Because right now it feels like I just painted a target on my back." "You painted a target on their backs. There's a difference." Reagan met her eyes directly. From this moment on, you stay visible. You stay around other people. You don't go anywhere alone. Understood? Maya nodded. What happens now? Now I finish what I came here to do. The helicopter carrying Colonel Marcus Davenport touched down at 0900 hours precisely. Reagan watched from the equipment shed as he emerged, flanked by 2 staff officers who moved with the nervous energy of people who knew their boss was in a dangerous mood. Davenport was exactly what his file had suggested. Tall, broad-shouldered, uniform so immaculate it looked like it had never seen a day of actual field service. He moved with the proprietary confidence of a man who believed he owned everything he could see. Cross met him on the landing pad. Reagan couldn't hear their conversation from this distance, but she could read the body language. Davenport was talking fast, gesturing sharply. Cross was nodding his posture. Rigid, his face carefully neutral. Then Davenport pointed directly at the equipment shed. Directly at her. Cross shook his head. Davenport's face reddened. More sharp gestures. Cross said something that made Davenport go very still. Reagan understood. Cross had just told him that her file was classified above his clearance level, that he couldn't touch her without going through channels that would ask questions he didn't want to answer. Davenport turned and stared at her across the distance. Even from here, she could feel the weight of his hostility, the calculation, the threat. She held his gaze without blinking until he finally turned away and stalked toward the command building, his staff officers scrambling to keep up. The first move had been made. Now she would wait to see how he responded. She didn't have to wait long. 30 minutes later, Staff Sergeant Morrison appeared at the range where Reagan was conducting her daily evaluation. He was accompanied by 3 other instructors, all of them wearing the particular expression of men who had been sent to deliver a message. "Cole," Morrison's voice was loud enough to carry. "You're in a restricted zone. This range is reserved for qualified personnel only." Reagan continued her rifle check without looking up. "I have clearance for all training areas. You can verify with Master Gunnery Sergeant Cross." "Cross doesn't run this facility. Colonel Davenport does. And Colonel Davenport wants to know why a civilian contractor thinks she can participate in military training exercises without proper authorization. My authorization came from the Secretary of the Navy's office." Morrison laughed. It was an ugly sound. "The Secretary of the Navy, right. And I had lunch with the President last week." He stepped closer, deliberately crowding her space. "Listen carefully. I don't know what game you're playing, but it ends now. You're going to pack your gear, get in your vehicle, and leave this facility. Today." Reagan finally looked up. Her eyes met Morrison's, and something in her expression made him take a half-step backward before he caught himself. "Staff Sergeant Morrison," she said quietly. "I know what you did to Corporal Castillo. I know what you did to the other women you targeted. I know about the complaint that disappeared. And I know about the text messages from the day before she died." Morrison's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. And so does Colonel Davenport. The only question now is whether you want to be remembered as someone who cooperated with the investigation or someone who went down with the people who ordered the cover-up." The other instructors exchanged glances. This wasn't going the way they had expected. Morrison's composure cracked. "You're insane. You're a civilian contractor making wild accusations about things you know nothing about. I'm a DevGru operator conducting a classified federal investigation into 2 suspicious deaths at this facility. The accusations aren't wild. They're documented. And by the end of today, everyone involved is going to answer for what they did." The silence that followed was absolute. Morrison stood frozen, his face cycling through shock, fear, and finally something that looked like cornered desperation. You're lying. Reagan reached into her tactical vest and pulled out her credentials folder. She held it up, letting him see the JSOC insignia, the classification stamps, the authorization that carried more weight than anyone at this facility could override. Do I look like I'm lying? Morrison stared at the folder like it was a live grenade. His hands were trembling now. The three instructors behind him had already started backing away, physically distancing themselves from whatever was about to happen. This isn't over, Morrison said, but his voice had lost its authority. He sounded like a man who had just realized he was standing on the edge of a cliff. No, Reagan agreed. It isn't. But it will be soon. Morrison turned and walked away quickly, pulling out his phone before he had gone 10 steps. Reagan watched him dial, watched him start talking urgently, watched him head directly toward the command building. He was going to warn Davenport. She was counting on it. By noon, the atmosphere on the base had shifted in ways that everyone could feel, but nobody could explain. Conversation stopped when Reagan walked by. Instructors who had been friendly 3 days ago now avoided eye contact. The normal rhythms of training had been disrupted by something invisible and dangerous. Cross found her in the mess hall, eating lunch alone at her usual corner table. He sat down across from her without asking permission. You need to tell me what's happening, he said quietly. Right now. Reagan studied his face for a moment, calculating. Cross wasn't part of the problem. Her investigation had confirmed that. He was a good Marine who had been kept in the dark about what was happening under his nose. 2 Marines died at this facility, she said. Castillo and Reeves. The official reports say training accident. The evidence says murder. Cross's face went gray. Murder. Corporal Castillo filed a sexual harassment complaint against Staff Sergeant Morrison. Sergeant Reeves was going to testify as a witness. They both died in a training exercise that wasn't on the schedule until that morning. An exercise that put them in a live fire zone without proper safety protocols. Cross shook his head. That's not possible. I reviewed those reports myself. Everything was documented. Signed off by Colonel Davenport personally. Exactly. The implication hit Cross like a physical blow. Reagan watched him process it, watched the denial war with the evidence of his own experience. He knew something had been wrong. He had felt it for months. He just hadn't wanted to believe what his instincts were telling him. Davenport is the general's son, Cross said slowly. His career has been protected since the day he enlisted. If what you're saying is true, then a lot of powerful people have a lot to lose, which is why they sent someone like me. Someone who can't be pressured. Someone who doesn't care about politics or connections or whose father knows whose father. And Morrison pulled the trigger, metaphorically speaking, but he didn't give himself the orders. Someone higher up decided that Castillo's complaint was a threat that needed to be eliminated permanently. Cross was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. I trained Castillo. She was one of the best I'd ever seen. Focused. Dedicated. The kind of Marine who makes you remember why you do this job. His hands clenched on the table. And someone killed her to cover up a harassment scandal. That's what the evidence suggests. What do you need from me? Reagan met his eyes. I need you to stay out of the way. What's going to happen next is going to be ugly, and it's going to happen fast. The best thing you can do is make sure the operators under your command don't get caught in the crossfire. And Davenport is going to destroy himself. He just doesn't know it yet. The confrontation came at 14:30 hours during the afternoon live fire drill. Reagan was on the advanced range participating in a close-quarters battle simulation alongside 15 Marine operators. She had expected Davenport to come for her eventually. She had counted on his ego making him do it publicly in front of witnesses who would see everything and remember it. He exceeded her expectations. The sound came first. Heavy boots on gravel moving with purposeful fury. Then his voice loud enough to carry across the entire range. "Everyone stop what you're doing. Now!" The drill halted immediately. Operators lowered their weapons and turned toward the command voice. Reagan finished her current position, safed her rifle, and turned with the same calm efficiency she brought to everything. Davenport was striding toward her, his face flushed with rage. Behind him came Morrison and 4 other staff officers arranged like an entourage designed to project power and intimidation. "You!" Davenport pointed at Reagan, his finger jabbing the air like a weapon. "You think you can come into my facility, make accusations against my people, and walk away without consequences?" Reagan said nothing. Her silence seemed to infuriate him more than any response could have. "I called Washington. I called the Navy Secretary's office. You know what they told me. They told me your investigation is need to know, and that I don't need to know." His voice rose with each sentence. "I am the commanding officer of this facility. Everything that happens here is my business. Everything." "Not everything," Reagan said quietly. "Not anymore." And Davenport stepped closer, deliberately invading her space. The operators around them shifted uncomfortably. Cross had moved to the edge of the group, his body tense, his eyes sharp. "You're a child playing soldier," Davenport said, his voice dripping with contempt. 22 years old, no real combat experience, no understanding of how the world actually works. You think because someone gave you a piece of paper that says classified, you can threaten people who have dedicated their lives to this country. I know what you did to Castillo and Reeves." The words landed like hammer blows. Davenport's face went white for just a fraction of a second before the rage covered it again. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. Morrison texted your office the day before they died. Problem will be resolved by EOD tomorrow." And it was. The problem was resolved permanently. 2 Marines who would have testified about harassment in your command died in an accident that you personally authorized. That's a lie. I have the text messages. I have the altered training schedules. I have witness statements from people who are willing to talk now that they know someone is actually listening. Reagan's voice remained calm, factual, devastating. "By the end of today, NCIS will have enough evidence to arrest everyone involved. The only question is whether you want to be the person who ordered the cover-up or the person who ordered the murders." Davenport's control shattered. "You think I'm afraid of you?" His voice cracked with fury. "You think some little girl from some classified unit can come here and destroy everything I've built? My father is a 3-star general. My family has served this country for 4 generations. You're nothing." He stepped even closer, his face inches from hers now. Reagan could smell coffee on his breath, could see the veins pulsing in his temples. "Women like you don't belong here. You never have. You got your position because someone wanted to check a diversity box, not because you earned it. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of fraud you really are." Reagan's expression didn't change. "Step back, Colonel." "Or what?" he laughed. "You're going to report me, add it to your little investigation. Go ahead, see how far it gets you. This is your last warning." "Warning?" Davenport's face twisted into something ugly. "I don't take warnings from little girls who think they can play with the big boys." He raised his hand. The slap connected with the side of Reagan's face hard enough to turn her head. The sound echoed across the range like a gunshot. 40 operators stood frozen, their faces showing shock, horror, disbelief. Everything stopped. Reagan tasted blood where the inside of her cheek had split against her teeth. Her face throbbed with the impact. But her eyes never left Davenport's, and in them was something that made the anger drain from his expression, replaced by the first flicker of real fear. "You just made a mistake," she said quietly. "What are you going to do about it?" But his voice had lost its certainty. Reagan moved. Her left hand shot up, trapped his wrist, and rotated it outward in a joint lock that sent signals of pain screaming up his arm. Her body pivoted inside his stance, using his own weight against him. One smooth motion practiced 10,000 times until it had become pure instinct. Davenport's feet left the ground. He hit the dirt face first with enough force to knock the wind from his lungs. The impact was loud and final, the sound of something breaking that could never be fixed. Reagan stepped back, her breathing still calm and controlled. She looked down at him without expression, without triumph, without anything except professional assessment. 5 seconds. That was all it had taken. She reached into her tactical vest and pulled out the classified folder, dropped it on the ground beside his face. "You just assaulted a DevGru operator during a classified federal investigation into murders you helped cover up. That's your career. That's your legacy. That's everything your family name was supposed to protect." Davenport lay in the dirt, gasping, his wrist still throbbing from the lock. His eyes found the folder, found the JSOC insignia, found the authorization signatures that proved everything she had said was true. Around them, 40 Marines stood in absolute silence. Cross was the first to move, coming to attention with parade ground precision. His hand rose to his brow in a crisp salute. One by one, every operator on that range followed. Men who had trained their entire careers for moments of impossible pressure. Men who recognized real competence when they saw it. Men who understood that what they had just witnessed would be talked about for years. Reagan returned the salute with the same precision, held it for the proper interval, then dropped her hand. "Master Gunnery Sergeant Cross," she said, her voice carrying across the range. "Colonel Davenport is relieved of duty pending criminal investigation. Please ensure he is secured until NCIS arrives." "Yes, ma'am." Morrison stood frozen at the edge of the group, his face the color of ash. Reagan's eyes found him. "Staff Sergeant Morrison, you should know that NCIS has already been briefed on your involvement. Running would only make things worse." Morrison didn't run. He didn't speak. He simply stood there, watching his entire world collapse around him, understanding finally that the protection he had counted on had been an illusion. Reagan turned and walked toward the edge of the range, leaving Davenport in the dirt, leaving the chaos she had created to sort itself out behind her. Maya Santos was standing near the equipment shed, tears streaming down her face. But she wasn't crying from sadness. She was crying because for the first time in months, someone had believed her. Someone had fought for her. Someone had proven that the untouchable ones could be touched after all. Reagan stopped beside her briefly. "It's not over yet," she said quietly. "But it will be soon. And when it is, the people who hurt you are going to answer for everything." Maya nodded, unable to speak. Reagan continued walking, leaving the range behind, leaving the mess for others to clean up. She had done what she came to do. She had documented what needed to be documented, and she had proven in front of 40 witnesses that no rank was high enough to protect someone from the consequences of their actions. Behind her, Davenport was being helped to his feet by officers who wouldn't meet his eyes. His career was over. His freedom was about to follow. And the family name that had protected him for his entire life had become an anchor that would drag him down into depths he had never imagined. The investigation was just beginning. But the outcome was no longer in doubt. The NCIS team arrived within 2 hours of Reagan's call. 3 vehicles, 7 agents, led by Special Agent Victoria Chen, a woman in her 40s, whose reputation for dismantling military corruption had made her both feared and respected across every branch of service. Reagan met them at the main gate, her face still bearing the red mark where Davenport's palm had connected. "Operative Cole." Chen's eyes swept over her, noting the injury, cataloging it as evidence. "I read your preliminary report on the flight here. You've been busy. The situation accelerated faster than anticipated. I heard 40 witnesses watched a colonel assault a federal investigator and get dropped in 5 seconds. Chen allowed herself a thin smile. That's going to make my job significantly easier. The assault is secondary. The murders are what matters. Chen's expression sharpened. Walk me through it. Reagan did. Castillo's harassment complaint, the buried investigation, the text messages between Morrison and Davenport's office, the training exercise that wasn't scheduled until the morning of the deaths, the altered safety protocols that put 2 Marines in a kill zone without proper protection. Chen listened without interrupting. When Reagan finished, the agent was quiet for a long moment. You have documentation for all of this, everything, including audio recordings Morrison didn't know were being made, and witness statements from personnel who were afraid to come forward until now. Who's your primary witness? Petty Officer Maya Santos. She filed the original harassment complaint that started everything. She's been collecting evidence for 6 months, waiting for someone to listen. Chen nodded slowly. Where is she now? Secured. I have her in a location where Morrison's people can't reach her. Good. Because in about 20 minutes, this facility is going to become very chaotic. People who thought they were protected are going to realize they're not. And desperate people do desperate things. Reagan had already considered this. I need your team to take Santos into protective custody. Officially. She's the key to everything. Done. What about you? I have one more thing to do before this is over. Chen studied her face for a moment, reading something there that civilians would have missed. This isn't just an assignment for you, is it? Reagan didn't answer immediately. When she spoke, her voice was quieter than usual. 3 years ago, I lost 4 teammates in an ambush. Bad intelligence. Someone at command ignored warning signs because acknowledging them would have delayed the operation. My friends died because someone decided their schedule was more important than their lives. And the person responsible got reassigned, no charges, no consequences, just a quiet transfer to a position where they couldn't do any more damage. Reagan's jaw tightened. I swore after that I would never let it happen again. Not on my watch. Not when I had the power to stop it. Chen was silent for a moment. Then she nodded once, a gesture that contained understanding and respect, and something that might have been recognition of a kindred spirit. Go do what you need to do. My team will handle the rest. Reagan walked toward the command building where Davenport was being held under guard. Behind her, Chen began issuing orders to her agents, setting in motion an investigation that would consume the facility for months to come. But Reagan wasn't thinking about the investigation. She was thinking about a conversation she needed to have. A truth that needed to be spoken out loud. A ghost that needed to be laid to rest. Davenport was in a small conference room, seated at a metal table with his wrists in restraints. 2 military police officers stood at the door, their faces impassive. When Reagan entered, Davenport's head snapped up, his eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and fear. Come to gloat. His voice was hoarse, stripped of the commanding authority he had wielded just hours before. No. Reagan pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. I came to give you a choice. A choice, he laughed bitterly. What choice do I have? You've destroyed everything. You destroyed it yourself. I just documented what you did. Reagan folded her hands on the table. Right now, NCIS is securing evidence that connects you to 2 murders: text messages, altered records, witness statements. By tomorrow morning, you'll be formally charged. I didn't kill anyone. You ordered the cover-up. You authorized the training exercise that killed them. You signed the falsified reports. In the eyes of the law, that makes you just as responsible as the person who pulled the trigger. Davenport's face contorted. Morrison was supposed to handle it quietly. The harassment complaint was going to ruin careers. Good Marines were going to lose everything because one woman couldn't handle a little attention. Reagan felt the cold rage settle deeper into her chest, but her voice remained calm. A little attention. Is that what you call it when a superior officer corners a subordinate and forces himself on her, when she has to document bruises to prove what happened? When she files an official complaint and watches it disappear because the people who should protect her are protecting her abuser instead? You don't understand how the military works. I understand exactly how it works. I've spent my entire career inside it. The difference between us is that I think it should work better. Davenport was silent. Some of the defiance had drained from his expression, replaced by something that looked almost like desperation. My father will fix this, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. He has connections. He can make this go away. No, he can't. Not this time. Reagan leaned forward slightly. Your father's connections might have protected you before. They might have smoothed over complaints and buried inconvenient reports and made sure you never faced consequences for your failures. But this is different. This is murder. And 40 Marines watched you assault a federal investigator. There's no fixing that. There's no making it go away. The reality of his situation finally seemed to penetrate. Davenport's shoulders slumped. His eyes went distant. What do you want from me? I want you to tell me who else was involved. Everyone in your chain who knew about the cover-up. Everyone who helped bury Castillo's complaint. Everyone who signed off on the training exercise that killed her. And if I cooperate, then I recommend to NCIS that you be treated as a cooperating witness rather than a primary conspirator. You'll still face charges, you'll still go to prison, but the difference between 20 years and life is significant. Davenport stared at her for a long moment. She could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, the desperate search for any way out that didn't involve betraying the people who had helped him. Morrison set up the exercise, he said finally. But he didn't do it alone. Captain Reeves, no relation to the sergeant who died. He's the one who altered the safety protocols. And Lieutenant Colonel Harper at Division approved the falsified after-action report without asking questions. Why? What did they have to gain? Morrison had dirt on all of them. Affairs, financial irregularities, the kind of things that end careers if they come to light. He made it clear that if he went down, he'd take everyone with him. So you're saying Morrison orchestrated everything? Davenport's face twisted. Morrison is a predator. He's been targeting women under his command for years, moving from unit to unit before anyone could build a case against him. He picked Castillo because she was good, because she was going places, because destroying her would prove he could destroy anyone. And when she fought back, he panicked. The complaint was detailed. She had witnesses, medical documentation. If it went forward, he would have been court-martialed. His career would have been over. Davenport paused. So he came to me, reminded me of certain indiscretions that could embarrass my family, suggested that the problem could be resolved if I looked the other way. And you agreed. I didn't know he was going to kill them. Davenport's voice cracked. I thought he was just going to bury the complaint, transfer Castillo somewhere else, make it all go away quietly. I didn't know until after it happened. But you covered it up anyway. What choice did I have? By then I was already involved. If the truth came out about the harassment cover-up, my career was over. If the truth came out about the murders... He couldn't finish the sentence. Reagan studied him in silence. This was the man who had slapped her across the face 2 hours ago. The man who had built his entire identity on the weight of his family name and the power of his position. Now he sat in restraints, his career destroyed, his freedom about to be taken, his legacy reduced to a cautionary tale about what happened when ego and corruption went unchecked. She felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not pity. Just the cold certainty that justice, however imperfect, was finally being served. "One more question," she said. "The training exercise. Who gave the direct order to put Castillo and Reeves in that kill zone without proper safety protocols?" Davenport's eyes dropped to the table. "Morrison briefed the exercise, but the final approval came from me. I signed off on it without reviewing the safety documentation. Morrison told me it was routine. I trusted him." "You trusted a man you knew was a predator and a blackmailer." "I trusted a man who said he would make my problems disappear." Davenport's voice was barely above a whisper now. "And I've spent every day since wondering if I could have stopped it. If I had just looked at the paperwork. If I had asked the right questions. If I had been the officer I was supposed to be, instead of the officer I became." Reagan stood. "It's too late for wondering, but it's not too late to do the right thing now. NCIS will be in to take your formal statement. Tell them everything you told me. Names, dates, details. Don't hold anything back." "Will it matter? To the families of the people who died? Yes, it will matter." She left him there alone with the wreckage of his choices and walked back into the California sun. Morrison was taken into custody 30 minutes later. Unlike Davenport, he didn't go quietly. Reagan was near the motor pool when she heard the shouting. She moved toward the sound and found Morrison surrounded by 4 NCIS agents, his face contorted with rage, his wrists being forced into handcuffs while he screamed protests that echoed across the compound. "You can't do this. I know people. I have protection. Do you know who I am?" Special Agent Chen stood watching her expression impassive. "Staff Sergeant Morrison, you are being detained pending charges of conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and sexual assault. You have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you exercise that right." "This is insane. I didn't kill anyone. That exercise was routine. Equipment failures happen all the time." "The equipment didn't fail, Staff Sergeant. The safety protocols were deliberately altered to create conditions that would be lethal to anyone in that zone. We have the original documentation and the falsified version. We have the timestamps showing when the changes were made. And we have your text messages coordinating the entire operation." Morrison's face went white. "Those messages were private. You can't use them." "They were recovered from military communication systems during a federal investigation into crimes committed on a military installation. They're absolutely admissible." Chen nodded to her agents. "Get him out of here." Morrison was half-dragged toward the waiting vehicle, still screaming denials that grew less coherent with each passing second. Reagan watched him go, feeling the weight of something she couldn't quite name. This was the man who had killed Corporal Castillo and Sergeant Reeves. The man who had terrorized women under his command for years. The man who had believed his position made him untouchable. Now he was being loaded into the back of a federal vehicle, his career over his freedom gone, his future measured in years behind bars. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it just felt like the end of something that should never have been allowed to begin. Maya Santos was brought to Chen's mobile command center under protective custody. Reagan found her there an hour later, seated at a folding table, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. "How are you holding up?" Maya looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but her voice was steady. "I've been going over my statement with Agent Chen. All the documentation, all the recordings, everything I've been carrying for 6 months. And it's real now, it's actually happening." Maya's voice cracked slightly. I kept telling myself that if I just gathered enough evidence, if I just found the right person to tell someone would believe me, someone would do something. But part of me always thought it was hopeless. That people like Morrison always win. Reagan sat down across from her. They don't always win. It just feels that way because the times they lose don't make the news. The quiet victories, the small acts of justice, those don't get stories written about them. Is this a quiet victory? No. This one is going to be very loud. And that's good. Because it needs to be loud enough that other people like Morrison think twice before they assume they can get away with it. Maya was quiet for a moment. Then she asked the question that had clearly been weighing on her. Why did you leave me that notebook, the one with all the techniques and training notes? You didn't have to do that. Reagan considered her answer. Because someone should have helped me once, and nobody did. What do you mean? For a long moment, Reagan didn't respond. This wasn't something she talked about, not to colleagues, not to commanders, not to anyone. But Maya had earned the truth. She had risked everything to expose the people who had hurt her, and she deserved to understand why Reagan had fought so hard to help her. When I was 19, I was assaulted by an instructor during selection training, Reagan said quietly. He was a decorated operator, 20 years of service. Everyone looked up to him. Maya's face went pale. What happened? I reported it, filed a formal complaint, had witnesses, had medical documentation, the whole thing. And he got transferred to a different unit. No charges, no consequences. Just a quiet move to somewhere he could keep doing what he had always done. Reagan's jaw tightened. I was told that if I pushed the matter further, my career would be over before it started. That nobody would believe me over him. That I should be grateful I was being allowed to continue in the program at all. But you made it through anyway. I made it through because I decided that the best revenge was becoming better than anyone who had ever doubted me. Becoming the kind of operator they couldn't ignore or dismiss or push aside. Reagan met Maya's eyes directly. I couldn't stop what happened to me, but I swore I would spend my career making sure it didn't happen to anyone else. That when I saw injustice, I would document it, expose it, force the system to confront what it wanted to ignore. Is that why you do these investigations? It's part of it. The other part is that I've seen what happens when systems fail, when standards slip, when the people who are supposed to protect others are too corrupt or too lazy or too afraid to do their jobs. Reagan's voice hardened. People die, good people. People who trusted the system to work the way it was supposed to. Maya was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was stronger. Corporal Castillo was my friend. We went through basic together. She was the one who convinced me to try out for the sniper program, said I had the talent, and I shouldn't waste it. Tears welled in her eyes, but didn't fall. When she filed that complaint, I was scared. I told her maybe she should just let it go, find a way to transfer out quietly, avoid the fight. What did she say? She said that if she didn't fight, Morrison would just do it to someone else, that staying silent made her complicit in whatever he did next. Maya's voice broke. She was braver than me, and they killed her for it. They killed her because they were cowards who couldn't face the consequences of their own actions. Her bravery didn't get her killed. Their corruption did. Does that make it easier? No. Nothing makes it easier. But it's the truth, and the truth matters. The door to the command center opened, and Special Agent Chen entered. Her expression was grim. We have a problem. Reagan stood immediately. What kind of problem? Lieutenant General Davenport just called the Secretary of Defense. He's demanding that his son be released immediately, and that all charges be dropped pending a review by Military Legal Affairs. Reagan felt something cold settle in her chest. He's trying to make it go away. He's trying. Whether he succeeds depends on how solid our evidence is, and how much political capital he's willing to burn. The evidence is solid. I know, but politics has a way of trumping evidence when enough powerful people want something buried. Chen's jaw tightened. I've seen it before. Cases that should have been slam dunks disappearing into legal limbo. Witnesses changing their stories. Evidence getting lost. Justice being delayed until everyone forgets why they cared in the first place. Not this time. What makes you so sure? Reagan pulled out her phone and dialed a number she had memorized but never expected to use. It rang twice before a voice answered. Operative Cole, I wasn't expecting to hear from you directly. Admiral Thornton, I need your help. The voice on the other end of the line belonged to Admiral James Thornton, the Director of Naval Criminal Investigative Service, and one of the few people in the military establishment who had the authority to push back against even a 3-star general. I'm aware of the situation at Pendleton. Chen has been keeping me informed. Then you know that General Davenport is trying to shut down the investigation. I know he's making calls. I also know that those calls are going to fail. Reagan felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. How can you be sure? Because the Secretary of Defense owes me several favors, and I just called in all of them. The investigation proceeds. The charges stand. And if General Davenport continues to interfere, he's going to find himself facing questions about his own conduct that he really doesn't want to answer. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. You did the hard work. You gathered the evidence. You exposed the corruption. All I did was make sure the right people understood that this isn't going to be swept under the rug. Thornton paused. Your report is going to result in system-wide reforms, Cole. The things you documented at Pendleton aren't unique. They're reflections of problems that exist across multiple facilities. Command is using your findings as a template for addressing institutional failures that have been ignored for too long. That's good to hear. It should be. You've made a lot of enemies with this investigation, but you've also made the system better. That's not nothing. Another pause. Get some rest, Operative. You've earned it. The line went dead. Reagan turned to Chen and Maya, who had been listening to her half of the conversation. The investigation is protected. General Davenport's interference isn't going to work. Chen's expression relaxed slightly. Then we proceed as planned. I'll need both of you to provide formal depositions over the next few days. Morrison is already trying to cut a deal. The more we can corroborate from his statements, the stronger the case becomes. He's cooperating. He's trying to blame everyone except himself. Claims he was following orders. Claims Davenport forced him into it. Claims he never intended for anyone to actually die. Chen's voice dripped with contempt. It's pathetic, but it's useful. Every name he gives us is another person we can investigate. Another piece of the puzzle falling into place. Reagan nodded. The investigation would continue for months, possibly years. There would be trials and appeals and all the slow machinery of military justice grinding forward. But the outcome was no longer in doubt. The people who had killed Castillo and Reeves would answer for their crimes. It wasn't perfect justice. It was too late for that. But it was real justice, and that was more than most people ever got. Maya stood her coffee finally abandoned. What happens to me now? You finish your statement with NCIS. Then you decide whether you want to continue in the program or transfer somewhere else. Reagan met her eyes. Either choice is valid. Nobody would blame you for wanting a fresh start somewhere that doesn't have these memories. And if I stay, then you become part of making this place better. You help ensure that what happened to Castillo never happens to anyone else. Maya was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing the options. Then her jaw set with determination. Castillo stayed. She fought, even when it cost her everything. Her voice strengthened. I'm not going to let her death mean nothing. I'm staying, and I'm going to make sure her name is remembered for the right reasons. Reagan felt something shift in her chest. something that might have been pride or hope, or simply recognition of strength in someone who had every reason to be broken, but had chosen to be strong instead. "Good," she said quietly. "Then let's get to work." The days that followed moved with a strange rhythm, fast and slow at the same time. Fast because there was so much to do. Depositions to give. Evidence to catalog. Witnesses to interview. Slow because the machinery of military justice ground forward at its own pace, indifferent to anyone's desire for quick resolution. Reagan spent 16 hours a day working with Chen's team, reviewing every piece of documentation, identifying gaps in the evidence, tracking down corroboration for every claim Morrison and Davenport had made in their statements. The picture that emerged was worse than she had anticipated. Morrison hadn't just targeted Castillo. Over his 15-year career, he had assaulted at least 11 women across 4 different duty stations. Each time when complaints surfaced, he had been quietly transferred rather than prosecuted. Each time, the women who reported him had been pressured to stay silent or had seen their careers derailed when they refused. The system hadn't failed these women. The system had been designed to fail them. "How does this keep happening?" Maya asked one evening, sitting across from Reagan in the now familiar mobile command center. Her voice carried exhaustion and something deeper, something that sounded like grief for a world that should have been better than it was. "Because the people in charge decided that protecting reputations was more important than protecting people," Reagan replied. "Because every time Morrison got transferred instead of court-martialed, someone made a calculation that avoiding scandal was worth more than stopping a predator. And those calculations added up to Castillo dying." "Yes." Maya was quiet for a moment. "I keep thinking about the other women, the ones before her. If any of them had been believed, if anyone had actually done something, she might still be alive." Reagan didn't soften the truth. Maya deserved honesty, not comfort. That's the real cost of institutional failure. It's not abstract. It's measured in specific people who got hurt or killed because someone decided that accountability was too inconvenient. Does it ever get easier? Seeing this, knowing how broken everything is? No, it gets clearer. You start to recognize the patterns, the excuses, the ways that systems protect themselves instead of the people they're supposed to serve. Reagan's voice hardened. "But it never gets easier. The day it gets easy is the day you've stopped caring enough to do the work right." Necross appeared in the doorway of the command center, his face showing the strain of a week that had tested everything he thought he knew about his facility and his people. "Cole, Chen wants to see you. They've found something." Reagan followed him through the compound to where Chen had set up her primary evidence review station. The agent was bent over a laptop, her expression tight with controlled anger. "What is it?" Chen turned the screen toward Reagan. "We found the original training schedule for the day Castillo and Reeves died. The one before Morrison altered it." Reagan studied the document. The original schedule showed a standard marksmanship drill at Range 7, a controlled environment with multiple safety checkpoints. The altered version, the one that had actually been implemented, moved the exercise to Range 12, a live fire zone with minimal oversight and known equipment reliability issues. "Morrison didn't just change the location," Chen continued. "He changed the ammunition specifications. The original called for training rounds. The altered version specified live ammunition in a configuration that exceeded the protective capacity of the gear Castillo and Reeves were issued." "He set them up to die." "He set them up to die in a way that would look like equipment failure or human error. If it hadn't been for Santos keeping records and your investigation connecting the dots, this would have been closed as a tragic accident." Reagan felt the cold certainty settle deeper into her bones. She had suspected murder from the beginning. Now she had proof. Has Morrison seen this yet? He's being confronted with it right now. His lawyer is trying to negotiate a plea deal, but the charges just escalated from conspiracy to premeditated murder. There's no deal that gets him out of this. And Davenport, his lawyer is claiming he had no knowledge of the specific changes Morrison made, that he signed off on the exercise without realizing what he was approving. Is anyone buying that? Chen's expression was grim. It doesn't matter if they buy it. He signed the authorization. He was the commanding officer. Under military law, he's responsible for everything that happens under his command, whether he knew the details or not. What about his father? Is the general still trying to intervene? The general went silent about 3 hours ago. We got word that Admiral Thornton had a private conversation with him. Whatever was said, the interference stopped immediately. Reagan allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction. Lieutenant General Davenport had spent his entire career building political capital, cultivating relationships, ensuring that his family name opened doors that stayed closed for everyone else. Now that capital was worthless. His son was facing murder charges, and no amount of influence could change the evidence. There's something else, Chen said, her voice dropping slightly. Something that came up in Morrison's latest statement. Something you need to know. Reagan tensed. What? He named his protectors. The people who helped him avoid accountability at his previous duty stations. The officers who approved his transfers instead of his court-martials. Chen paused. One of the names on that list is Admiral Kenneth Ward. The name hit Reagan like a physical blow. Admiral Ward was one of the most senior officers in naval special warfare. He had signed off on her selection to DevGru. He had personally congratulated her when she completed the most difficult training program in the military. She had respected him. Ward knew about Morrison. According to Morrison's statement, Ward was the one who facilitated his transfer from Virginia Beach 6 years ago after a particularly serious complaint. Morrison claims Ward told him to keep his head down and learn discretion, and that as long as he didn't create scandals, his career would be protected. Reagan's hands clenched at her sides. Ward had been part of her chain of command. He had access to personnel files, evaluation reports, assignment recommendations. If he had been protecting Morrison for years, how many other predators had he shielded? How many careers had he shaped, based not on merit, but on loyalty to a system of mutual protection? Is the statement credible? We're investigating. But Morrison named specific dates, specific conversations, specific decisions that can be corroborated through official records. If he's telling the truth, Ward is going to face serious questions. And if Ward was protecting Morrison, who else was he protecting? Chen's silence was answer enough. This investigation was about to expand far beyond a single facility, a single predator, a single pair of murders. It was about to expose a network of complicity that reached into the highest levels of military leadership. Reagan thought about all the women who had filed complaints over the years, all the investigations that had gone nowhere, all the transfers that had been approved because it was easier than prosecution. Each one of those decisions had been made by someone, signed by someone, approved by someone. Now those decisions were going to be examined. Those signatures were going to be traced. Those someones were going to answer for what they had done. I need to make a call, Reagan said quietly. She found a quiet space near the edge of the compound and dialed the secure line to JSOC headquarters. Captain Morrison answered on the second ring. Cole, I was expecting your call. You've seen Chen's report. I've seen it. Admiral Ward has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. His office has been sealed. His communications are being reviewed. How far up does this go? A long pause. We don't know yet, but the preliminary indicators suggest this isn't an isolated case of poor judgment. This looks systematic, organized. a network of officers who protected each other and the people loyal to them regardless of what those people had done. And the people who weren't loyal, the women who filed complaints. The witnesses who tried to come forward, their careers were destroyed, transfers to dead-end assignments, negative evaluations that came out of nowhere, forced retirements. Morrison's voice carried barely contained anger. The system was weaponized against anyone who threatened to expose what was happening. Reagan closed her eyes. This was bigger than she had imagined, bigger than a single investigation could address. This was institutional corruption at a scale that would take years to fully uncover. What do you need from me? Keep doing what you're doing. Finish the Pendleton investigation. Document everything. When you're done there, we're going to need you to look at other facilities, other patterns, other networks. This is going to be my life for the next several years, isn't it? It might be. But Cole, what you've started here, what you've exposed, it's going to change things. Not overnight, not completely. But the people who thought they were untouchable are learning that they're not. The women who thought nobody would ever believe them are learning that someone will. That matters. Does it matter enough to bring back the people who died? No. Nothing can do that. But it might matter enough to save the people who would have died next. The ones we'll never know about because we stopped the system before it could fail them. Reagan ended the call and stood alone in the growing darkness, feeling the weight of everything that had happened and everything that was still to come. This was the work. Unglamorous. Often thankless. Sometimes dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with physical threats. But it mattered, and as long as it mattered, she would keep doing it. The court-martial proceedings for Staff Sergeant Morrison began 3 weeks later. Reagan was called to testify on the second day, presenting her findings in the methodical, detailed manner that had become second nature after years of conducting investigations. The defense attorney tried to challenge her credentials, suggesting that a 22-year-old couldn't possibly have the experience necessary to evaluate training operations at an elite military facility. Reagan responded by listing her operational history. Not the classified details, but enough to establish that she had more combat experience than most officers twice her age. The defense attorney didn't ask any more questions about her qualifications. Morrison sat at the defense table throughout her testimony, his face carefully neutral, but his eyes burning with hatred. He had believed his protectors would save him. He had counted on the system that had shielded him for 15 years to continue shielding him. Now he was watching that system turn against him, watching every favor he had been granted become evidence of the conspiracy he had been part of. Every transfer that had saved him from accountability, every complaint that had been buried, every witness who had been silenced. All of it was being exposed. All of it was being documented. All of it was being used to build a case that would send him to military prison for the rest of his life. When Reagan finished her testimony and stepped down from the witness stand, she passed within a few feet of Morrison's chair. Their eyes met for just a moment. She saw fear there, real fear, the kind that came from understanding finally that there was no escape, no political intervention, no quiet transfer to another assignment where he could start again. This was the end, and he knew it. Maya Santos testified the following day. Her voice was steady as she described what Morrison had done to her, what he had done to Castillo, what the system had done to protect him instead of protecting his victims. When she finished, the courtroom was absolutely silent. Even the defense attorney seemed unable to speak for several seconds. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts: murder, conspiracy, sexual assault, conduct unbecoming an officer. Morrison was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He was led from the courtroom in restraints. His military career erased his freedom, gone his name permanently associated with the crimes he had committed and the lives he had destroyed. Reagan watched him go, feeling the same strange emptiness she always felt at the end of an investigation. Justice had been served. But it had come too late for Castillo and Reeves. Too late for the 11 other women Morrison had assaulted over his 15-year career. Too late for all the people whose lives had been damaged by a system that had chosen to protect itself instead of protecting them. It was victory. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like the end of something that should never have been allowed to begin. Colonel Marcus Davenport's trial came 2 months later. He pleaded guilty to conspiracy charges in exchange for a reduced sentence, having finally accepted that his family name couldn't save him and that fighting the evidence would only make things worse. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. His military career was terminated. His benefits were revoked. The family legacy he had been so proud of ended not with honor, but with disgrace. His father, Lieutenant General Harrison Davenport, retired quietly 3 weeks after the verdict. The official statement cited personal reasons. The unofficial story, whispered through military circles, was that his interference in his son's investigation had generated enough scrutiny that retirement was the only way to avoid facing questions he couldn't answer. Reagan didn't attend the sentencing. She had already moved on to her next assignment. Another facility, another investigation, another system that needed someone to force it to confront its failures. But she received word of the verdict through secure channels, along with a message from Special Agent Chen. Justice served. Reforms continuing. Your work made this possible. Reagan read it once, saved it in the folder with similar messages from other investigations, and returned her attention to the documents in front of her. The work continued. It would always continue. There would always be more facilities to evaluate more problems, to document more people who had convinced themselves they were untouchable because nobody had ever held them accountable. But that was changing. Slowly, painfully. One investigation at a time. Master Gunnery Sergeant Leon Cross was officially appointed commanding officer of the training facility 6 weeks after Davenport's arrest. His first act was to call an all-hands meeting where he outlined the changes that would be implemented under his leadership. Higher standards, stricter accountability, a zero-tolerance policy for harassment or discrimination of any kind, an open-door policy for anyone who had concerns about leadership or training practices. Some of the personnel who had thrived under Davenport's lax oversight transferred to other assignments. Others washed out when they discovered they couldn't meet the new standards. But the operators who remained became sharper, more capable, more worthy of the reputation the facility claimed. Petty Officer Maya Santos completed the sniper qualification program with the highest scores in her class. She was recommended for advanced training and accepted into a specialized unit that would benefit from her skills and her determination. Before she left the facility, she requested a private meeting with Cross. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for believing the investigation, for supporting Cole, for not being like the others." Cross shook his head. "I should have seen what was happening sooner. I should have asked harder questions. I let myself believe everything was fine because it was easier than confronting the possibility that it wasn't. You're confronting it now. Because someone forced me to. Cole showed up and made it impossible to ignore." Cross paused. "I've been doing this job for 18 years. I thought I understood how military culture worked, but watching her operate, watching her refuse to accept excuses or be intimidated by rank or political connections, I realized I had been settling for less than I should have demanded. She's remarkable. She's what all of us should aspire to be. Someone who does the right thing regardless of the cost. Someone who measures success by outcomes rather than recognition. Cross met Maya's eyes directly. You could be like that too, if you choose to be. Maya thought about Castillo, about the courage it had taken to file that complaint, about the price she had paid for refusing to stay silent. I'm going to try, she said quietly. For her, for all of them. Cross nodded. That's all anyone can ask. Reagan was finishing her final debrief at JSOC headquarters when the message arrived. It was from Maya, sent through unofficial channels, just 3 words and a photo. Thank you. Always. The photo showed Maya in her new unit insignia, standing at attention, her face showing the kind of quiet confidence that came from having survived something terrible and emerged stronger on the other side. Reagan saved the image in a folder she kept for moments like this, reminders that the work mattered, that the people she fought for remembered, that somewhere, because of what she had done, someone's life was better than it would have been otherwise. Her phone buzzed with another message, this one from Captain Morrison at JSOC. New assignment. Briefing in 2 hours. Get some rest first. Reagan looked at the message for a long moment. She had been running on adrenaline and determination for weeks. Her body ached. Her mind was tired. The thought of starting another investigation, of immersing herself in another system's failures, felt overwhelming. But then she thought about Castillo and Reeves, about the 11 women Morrison had assaulted before them, about Maya Santos, and all the others who were counting on someone to keep fighting for them. She typed a quick response. Understood. I'll be ready. Then she closed her eyes and allowed herself a few moments of stillness before the next battle began. The work continued. It would always continue, but for the first time in a long time, Reagan felt like she wasn't fighting alone. Somewhere in the system, changes were being made, reforms were being implemented. People were starting to understand that accountability wasn't optional, that protecting predators to avoid scandal was no longer acceptable, that the military they served was capable of being better than it had been. It wasn't perfect. It would never be perfect. But it was progress. And progress, however slow, however painful, was worth fighting for. 6 months had passed since Reagan Cole walked off the range at Camp Pendleton, leaving Colonel Marcus Davenport face down in the dirt and a system exposed for what it truly was. 6 months of trials and testimonies and reforms that rippled outward through military structures that had resisted change for decades. The investigation had grown far beyond what anyone initially anticipated. Admiral Ward's involvement led to 3 more admirals being placed under investigation. Morrison's confession named 17 officers across 4 branches of service who had participated in the network of protection that had allowed predators to operate with impunity. Some resigned quietly before charges could be filed. Others faced court-martial proceedings that stripped them of rank benefits and the respect they had spent careers accumulating. A few tried to fight, claiming political persecution, claiming the investigations were overreach, claiming they had done nothing wrong. The evidence said otherwise, and the evidence was overwhelming. Reagan learned about most of this through secure briefings and classified reports that landed on her desk between assignments. She had moved on to other facilities, other investigations, other systems that needed someone to force them to confront their failures. The work never stopped. The problems never disappeared completely. But something had shifted in the way those problems were addressed. People were paying attention now. Commanders who had once dismissed complaints were treating them seriously. Officers who had once protected their friends regardless of behavior were calculating the risks of that protection. The cost of corruption had increased dramatically, and when costs increased, behavior changed. It wasn't perfect. It would never be perfect. But it was progress. The call came on a Tuesday morning 6 months and 3 days after the confrontation that had ended Davenport's career. Reagan was reviewing documents for her current assignment when her secure phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Cole. Operative Cole, this is Captain Angela Morrison at JSOC. Admiral Thornton would like to speak with you. Can you be at headquarters by 1400 hours? Reagan checked her watch. I can be there. Good. Conference room 7. Come alone. The line went dead. Reagan spent the flight to Tampa running through possibilities. She had spoken with Thornton several times since Pendleton always through intermediaries, always about specific aspects of ongoing investigations. A direct meeting, especially one scheduled with such short notice, suggested something significant had changed. She arrived at JSOC headquarters with 20 minutes to spare. The security protocols were familiar by now, the checkpoints and badges and armed guards, who looked at everyone like they might be a threat, until proven otherwise. She navigated them automatically, her mind still working through scenarios. Conference room 7 was at the end of a long corridor past offices where analysts tracked threats, and planners coordinated operations, and the invisible machinery of national security ground forward around the clock. She knocked once and entered. Admiral Thornton was seated at the head of the table. He was older than she had expected, late 60s, with silver hair and the kind of weathered face that came from decades of difficult decisions. But his eyes were sharp, alert, missing nothing. He wasn't alone. Seated to his right was a woman Reagan didn't recognize, 50s civilian clothes, watching Reagan with an expression that suggested she was being evaluated. Operative Cole. Thornton gestured to a chair across from him. Thank you for coming on short notice. Reagan sat. Your message suggested urgency. It did. Thornton leaned back slightly. Before we proceed, I want to introduce Dr. Sarah Chen. She's the Deputy Director of the Department of Defense Inspector General's office. Reagan's attention sharpened. The IG's office was responsible for investigating fraud, waste, and abuse across the entire Defense Department. If they were involved, whatever was happening had implications far beyond military special operations. Chen has been following your work with considerable interest, Thornton continued. The Pendleton investigation, the subsequent exposures, the reforms that have resulted. I was doing my job. You were doing it exceptionally well. Chen spoke for the first time, her voice carrying the measured precision of someone who chose every word carefully. In 6 months, your investigation has led to the removal of 23 officers, the criminal prosecution of 7, and systemic changes to harassment reporting procedures across 3 service branches. The evidence led there. I just documented it. You did more than document. You created a model. Chen pulled a folder from her briefcase and slid it across the table. We've analyzed your methods, the way you approach investigations, the way you identify patterns, the way you build cases that can't be dismissed or buried. Reagan opened the folder. Inside were summaries of her investigations, not just Pendleton, but the work she had done before and after. Timelines, outcomes, success rates. Someone had been tracking her entire career. What is this? A proposal? Thornton's voice was measured. The problems you exposed at Pendleton aren't unique to that facility or that service branch. They're endemic. They exist throughout the military and civilian defense establishment. We've known about them for years, but every attempt to address them systematically has been blocked by the same networks of protection and influence that you've spent your career dismantling. I'm one person. I can only investigate one facility at a time. Exactly, which is why we want to change that. Chen leaned forward slightly. We want to create a new office. A specialized unit within the Inspector General's structure that focuses specifically on institutional corruption and systemic failures. Investigators who operate the way you operate, with the authority and resources to follow evidence wherever it leads, regardless of rank or political connections. Reagan felt the weight of what they were proposing settle over her. This wasn't just another assignment. This was an opportunity to multiply everything she had been doing, to train others, to build systems that could outlast her own career. You want me to lead this unit? We want you to build it. Thornton's voice carried conviction. From the ground up, recruit the investigators, establish the protocols, create something that can continue the work you've been doing long after you've moved on to other things. That's a significant expansion of responsibility. It is, but your track record suggests you're capable of handling it. Chen pulled another document from her briefcase. This is the authorization, signed by the Secretary of Defense. If you accept, you'll have direct reporting authority to the IG's office, independent operational control and budget allocation sufficient to build a team of 15 to 20 investigators. Reagan stared at the document, the signatures, the seals, the weight of institutional authority being placed in her hands. Why me? There are officers with more experience, more seniority, more political connections. That's precisely why we chose you. Thornton's expression was serious. The officers with experience and seniority and connections are part of the system that created these problems. They're embedded in networks of mutual obligation that make them vulnerable to the same pressures that corrupted the people you've been investigating. You're outside those networks. You don't owe anyone anything. You've proven repeatedly that you can't be intimidated or bought or pressured into backing down. I've also made a lot of enemies. Good enemies. The kind that tell people you can't be compromised. Thornton allowed himself a small smile. In this work, the quality of your enemies matters as much as the quality of your allies. Reagan was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. Building a unit from scratch, recruiting investigators, establishing protocols. It was a different kind of work than she was used to. Less direct, more administrative, but potentially far more impactful than anything she could accomplish alone. I want to select my own team. That's your prerogative. And I want operational independence, no interference from command structures that might have conflicts of interest. That's already built into the authorization. And I want resources to protect whistleblowers. The people who come forward with information are taking enormous risks. They need support, legal protection, career safeguards. Chen nodded slowly. We anticipated that request. There's a provision in the budget for exactly that purpose. Reagan looked at the document again, then at Thornton, then at Chen. When do I start? The first call Reagan made after accepting the position was to Master Gunnery Sergeant Leon Cross. Cole? His voice carried surprise and something that might have been warmth. I didn't expect to hear from you. I have a proposition. She explained the new unit, the authority, the resources, the mission. Cross listened without interrupting, and when she finished, his silence stretched for several seconds. You want me to leave my command? I want you to help build something that can do what I did at Pendleton, at every facility in the military. Something that can find the problems before they become catastrophes. Something that can protect the people who are trying to do the right thing. I've been running training programs for 18 years. It's all I know. You know how to recognize when systems are failing. You know how to identify leaders who are cutting corners. You know what good training looks like and what inadequate training looks like. Reagan paused. And you know what it costs when those failures aren't addressed. You watched Castillo and Reeves die because someone didn't do their job. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. I've been thinking about that, Cross said finally. Every day since you left, wondering what I could have done differently, what signs I missed, how 2 Marines under my command were murdered and I didn't see it coming. You couldn't have seen it. The system was designed to hide it from people like you. That doesn't make it easier. No, but it means the failure wasn't yours alone. It was institutional, and the only way to fix institutional failures is to build better institutions. Another long pause. Then Cross asked the question she had been expecting. Who else are you recruiting? You'd be the first, but I have a list. People I've identified over the years who showed integrity when it would have been easier to look the other way. People who reported problems even when they knew it would hurt their careers. People who understand that the mission has to come before politics. And Santos? Is she on your list? Reagan allowed herself a small smile. She's at the top of it. But she needs more time, more experience, a few more years in operational roles before she's ready for this kind of work. She's doing well. Made a name for herself at her new unit. They're talking about fast-tracking her for instructor certification. Good. She's earned it. Cross was quiet again, and Reagan could almost hear him thinking, weighing the options, calculating the costs and benefits the way he had been trained to do. If I do this, he said finally, I want your word that we're going to make a real difference, not just shuffle papers, not just write reports that get filed and forgotten. Real change. One. That's exactly what I want too. That's why I need people like you. Then I'm in. The unit took shape over the following months. Reagan recruited carefully selecting investigators who had demonstrated both competence and integrity, who understood the work they were taking on and the enemies they would make. Cross brought operational expertise and credibility. A retired Army colonel named Patricia Vance brought legal knowledge and a network of contacts throughout the JAG Corps. A former FBI agent named Michael Torres brought investigative techniques that complemented Reagan's military experience. They called themselves the Office of Institutional Integrity, a name that was deliberately bureaucratic, deliberately unmemorable. They didn't want publicity. They didn't want recognition. They wanted to do the work and let the results speak for themselves. The first year was the hardest. Building systems from scratch, establishing protocols, learning to work together as a team when everyone was used to operating alone. There were failures along the way, investigations that went nowhere, cases that fell apart when key witnesses changed their stories, moments when it seemed like the institutional resistance was too strong, the networks of protection too entrenched. But there were successes too. A colonel at Fort Bragg who had been embezzling funds for years caught and prosecuted. A harassment ring at an Air Force training facility exposed and dismantled. A pattern of falsified readiness reports at a Navy installation documented and corrected before anyone could be hurt. Each success built credibility. Each success made the next investigation easier. Slowly, the unit developed a reputation. People who had information started coming to them, trusting that their reports would be taken seriously, that they wouldn't face retaliation for speaking up. Maya Santos joined the unit on the 2nd anniversary of its founding. She had completed her advanced training, served with distinction in 2 deployments, and earned the kind of operational credibility that would make her effective as an investigator. Reagan met her at the airport the first time they had seen each other in person since Pendleton. "You look different," Maya said as they walked toward the parking structure. "Different how? Less tired, more settled, I guess. Like you found something you were looking for." Reagan considered the observation. The past 2 years had been demanding in ways she hadn't anticipated. Building the unit, managing people, navigating bureaucracy. There were days when she missed the simplicity of field work, of being able to focus on a single investigation without the distractions of administration. But Maya was right. There was something satisfying about building something that would outlast her own involvement. Something that could continue the work regardless of what happened to her personally. "I found something worth doing," she said finally. "That's not always the same as finding what you're looking for. It's more than most people get." They drove in comfortable silence for several miles before Maya spoke again. "I've been thinking about Castillo a lot lately. What she would say if she could see what's happened. Everything that came from her refusing to stay silent. What do you think she would say?" Maya was quiet for a moment. "I think she would be proud, but I think she would also remind us that it's not enough, that there are still people out there who need help, still systems that need to be fixed, still work that needs to be done." She'd be right. She usually was. Maya's voice carried old grief and new purpose. "That's why I wanted to join. Not just because of what you're building, but because of what it represents. The idea that one person refusing to accept injustice can start something bigger. That speaking up matters even when the cost is high." And Reagan thought about all the people who had contributed to getting them here. Cross, who had set aside his career to help build something new. Torres and Vance, who had brought expertise and dedication. The whistleblowers who had trusted them with information. The victims who had found the courage to tell their stories. And Castillo, whose death had started everything. Whose refusal to stay silent had exposed the corruption that led to the creation of the unit that was now carrying her legacy forward. "She would have made a hell of an investigator," Reagan said quietly. "She would have been the best." The 5th anniversary of the Office of Institutional Integrity brought a ceremony that Reagan had tried to decline. She didn't like recognition, didn't like standing in front of crowds while people talked about achievements she considered just part of the job. But Admiral Thornton had insisted. The unit had completed over 200 investigations. Dozens of corrupt officers had been removed from service. Systematic reforms had been implemented across all branches. The military's reporting systems for harassment and fraud had been completely overhauled. These were accomplishments worth acknowledging, Thornton argued. Not for Reagan's rankings, but for the sake of everyone who had contributed to making them possible. So she stood in the auditorium at the Pentagon, surrounded by investigators and analysts and support staff, while Thornton spoke about the unit's impact, and the Secretary of Defense presented an award that Reagan would probably never display. But there was one moment that made the whole ceremony worthwhile. After the formal proceedings concluded, a woman approached Reagan. 50s, civilian clothes, face lined with years of carrying something heavy. "You don't know me," the woman said. "My name is Elizabeth Castillo. Maria was my daughter." Reagan felt the words like a physical impact. Castillo's mother, the woman who had buried her daughter and never known the full truth about why she died. "Mrs. Castillo, I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry. Be proud." Elizabeth's eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. "I read the reports. I know what you did, what you exposed, what you built because of what happened to Maria. She's the reason any of this exists, her courage, her refusal to stay silent." "I know." Elizabeth reached out and took Reagan's hand. "I wanted you to know that when I think about my daughter now, I don't just think about how she died. I think about what came after. All the people you've helped, all the systems you've fixed. All the other daughters who didn't die because of what you learned from Maria's death." Reagan couldn't speak. The lump in her throat was too large, the weight of the moment too heavy. "She would have been so proud of you," Elizabeth continued. "Of everything you've accomplished. Of the person you've become." She squeezed Reagan's hand once firmly. "Thank you for not letting her death mean nothing." Then she was gone, disappearing into the crowd of people waiting to offer congratulations, leaving Reagan standing alone with the weight of everything she had carried for 5 years. Cross found her a few minutes later standing near the exit, her composure mostly restored. "You okay?" "Castillo's mother was here." Cross nodded slowly. "I saw. That must have been hard." "It was. But it was also—" Reagan searched for the right word. "Necessary. I needed to know that what we're doing matters to the people it's supposed to matter to." "It matters," Cross's voice carried absolute certainty. "Every investigation we complete, every corrupt officer we remove, every system we fix. It matters to the people who would have been hurt if we hadn't acted." Reagan looked at him, at the gray in his hair that hadn't been there when they started, at the lines around his eyes that came from years of difficult work, at the steady presence that had been essential to building everything they had accomplished. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for believing in this, for helping me build it." "Thank you for asking." Cross allowed himself a rare smile. "This is the most important work I've ever done. More important than all the operators I trained. More important than all the missions I supported, because this is the work that makes everything else possible." Reagan nodded. That was exactly right. That was what she had understood from the beginning, what had driven her through all the difficult days and disappointing setbacks and moments when the resistance seemed insurmountable. The people who deployed on missions, who pulled triggers, and made life-or-death decisions in hostile environments, they needed to know that the systems supporting them were functioning correctly, that their equipment was maintained, that their training was adequate, that the people giving them orders had earned the right to make those decisions. That was what accountability meant. Not punishment for its own sake, but the assurance that systems were working the way they were supposed to work, that failures were being identified and corrected, that the invisible infrastructure of military effectiveness was being maintained by people who cared enough to do it right. Reagan walked out of the Pentagon into the late afternoon sun, leaving behind the ceremony and the congratulations and the weight of 5 years of accumulated accomplishment. There was more work to do. There always would be. New facilities to investigate, new patterns to identify, new systems to fix before they could fail and cost lives. But for the first time since she had started this journey, Reagan felt something she had never expected to feel. Not victory, exactly, not satisfaction. Peace. The knowledge that she had found her purpose, that she was doing work that mattered, that somewhere, because of what she and her team had built, people were safer than they would have been otherwise. That was enough. That would always be enough. She pulled out her phone and dialed Maya's number. "Santos? New investigation. Briefing in 2 hours. You ready?" Maya's answer came without hesitation. "Always." Reagan ended the call and headed toward her car. The work continued. The mission endured. And somewhere in facilities across the country and around the world, people who thought they were untouchable were learning the truth that Reagan had spent her entire career proving. No rank is high enough to hide corruption. No connection is powerful enough to escape accountability. And the people who hold the line, who refuse to accept that good enough is sufficient, who measure success by outcomes, rather than recognition, those people are the ones who make everything else possible. That is not a story. That is a truth worth remembering. If you've ever stood alone to do what was right, even when it cost you everything, this story honors your choice. And if you believe that real strength never needs to announce itself, that genuine capability speaks through actions rather than titles, that the highest form of service is often invisible to those it protects, then you already understand what Reagan Cole spent her life proving. Accountability is not punishment. It is love expressed through the refusal to accept anything less than what people deserve. And that is a truth that will never change.